Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter, what we know as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. The verses are 21 through 26. If you'd like to follow along in the Bibles there in your pews, you are invited to do so at this time on page 786. Let's all listen for God's word to us today. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. The word of the Lord. The phone call lasted 2, maybe 3 minutes, and when it was over, I was stunned. I was finishing up my first year of seminary at the time. In our second year of seminary, every student had to do an internship at a church that was nearby. I applied to a local church, very confident that I would get the position for the fall. After all, this church was hiring 2 seminarians to work on their staff that fall. That's what the phone call was about. It was the pastor of that church calling to let me know that 2 of my classmates had been chosen, but not me. Well, after the shock wore off, first came the hurt. How could they reject me? Then came the panic. I didn't have a plan B. There was no other church I had applied to. What was I going to do for an internship? Then came the anger. I don't know about you, but when I get angry, I start to have these conversations with myself, all in my head. I remember right after that phone call, I was talking with myself nonstop. First, I talked with myself about the 2 students who had been hired. They're not smarter than me, I said to myself in a moment of brilliance. They're not more capable than me, I said to myself. Then I judged the church. They must have poor leadership there, I said to myself. That pastor who interviewed me, well, he must not know what he's doing. No wonder the church is declining. In another moment of brilliance, I said to myself. And in all the conversations I had with myself, it never occurred to me that perhaps the 2 people that church had hired were just a better fit for that church than I was. Or maybe that God wanted them there and wanted me doing something else. Has this kind of thing ever happened to you before? How many of you have ever been angry? I see like half the congregation with their hands in the air. I'll assume that everybody had their hand in the air, if not in real life, in their heart. How many of you have ever gone to places you're not proud of when you got angry? If you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment, says Jesus. The topic of our sermon this morning is anger. Not because I'm angry with any of you or because I think this is an angry church, but I do think there is something in society right now that is upping the ante when it comes to anger. According to one survey in 2018, Americans reported feeling stress, worry, and anger at the highest levels in a decade. Last August, an NBC Wall Street Journal poll reported that 70% of Americans say they're angry at the political establishment right now. A year ago, the cover of the Atlantic magazine ran a headline, "Why are we so angry?" What do followers of Jesus do with all the anger that's out there? What do followers of Jesus do with the anger that sometimes makes a home right here? I think the first thing we must recognize right from the outset is that anger is not always the wrong response to a problem. Sometimes it is the right response, a faithful response. Think of Jesus in the temple, overturning the tables of the money changers. Do you think God was looking upon Jesus and saying, now, Jesus, settle down"? Or consider Cecilia Munoz's story. I believe that a little outrage can go a long way. That's how Munoz began her reflection on the NPR series, This I Believe. I remember the exact moment when I discovered outrage as a kind of fuel, Munoz writes. I was 17, the daughter of Bolivian immigrants growing up in suburban Detroit. After a dinner table conversation with my family about the wars going on in Central America at that time, a good friend told me that he thought the U.S. might someday go to war in Latin America. Then he looked me in the eye and told me that if it happens, he believes that my parents, immigrants to this country, belong in an internment camp just like the Japanese Americans in World War II. Munoz goes on, "My outrage that day became the propellant for my life. I found jobs in the immigrant rights movement. I moved to Washington to work as an advocate. I found plenty to be angry about along the way," she says. Then Munoz says something fascinating. Anger has a way of hollowing out your insides. In my first job, if we helped 50 immigrant families in a day, the faces of the 5 who did not qualify haunted my dreams at night. She concludes, "It has not eaten me away completely, but I am deeply familiar with that hollow place that outrage carves in your soul." Maybe that's why Jesus frames the question the way he does today, because of that hollow place. Because anger has something to do with our souls. When Jesus says, "If you are angry," some Christians will hear those words and assume they mean that we should never be angry. I don't think that's it. The question is not how you and I avoid anger. The question is, what will we do with it? So then, says Jesus, when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. In other words, anger is not simply a personal issue or even an emotional issue. It is fundamentally a theological issue. According to Jesus, it doesn't just affect our relationships with other people, it affects our relationship with God. We do not get to separate the two and put our frustrations and resentments over here and our relationship with God over here. According to Jesus, they are all tangled up together. And maybe that's good news. Maybe what Jesus is telling us today is that God can work with us and through us, not just when we're joyful, not just when we're feeling generous, but even when we're angry. Let me give you an example. It did not happen to me. It happened to a friend. I have a friend who, back when he was in junior high, and he and his older brother decided to sneak out of the house one Saturday night. The plan was to meet another friend who wanted to wrap a girl's house in toilet paper. According to my friend, in the teenage mind, this wrapping of the girl's house in toilet paper was a logical way to demonstrate one's affection for said girl. So the three of them go around toilet papering not just the girl's house, but many houses until late into the night. When the two brothers returned home, all the doors were locked, every light turned off. This was not a good sign. When they left the house, not every door was locked, not every light turned off. They thought their parents were asleep when they left, but maybe that was not true. Time for a cover story. The two brothers did not want to ring the doorbell and admit to their parents what they had done, so they found a spare key hidden in the garage and snuck in through a little used door in the back of the house. They went into the back room, turned on the TV, decided they would pretend that they had been there the whole time. Before long, the boy's father walked in and calmly asked where they had been. "Nowhere," my friend lied. As he put it, there is an old saying that when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. Well, my brother and I did not stop digging that night. When our lie was challenged, we proceeded to tell another, and then another, and then another. Each new lie was more brazen than the last, and we watched our dad become angry, and then we watched his anger grow into fury. We would learn too late that he had watched us walk home, toilet paper in hand. He was just waiting for us to come clean. We were told to come up with punishments for his consideration and to wait while he thought about what he was going to do. Now, that waiting consisted of the silent treatment. How many of you are familiar with the silent treatment? Well, that silent treatment lasted not for 10 minutes, not for 10 hours, but for 2 whole days. When their father finally spoke to them, he asked a question. "What do you think your punishment ought to be?" Well, at this point, my friend and his brother were nervous enough that they decided that they would one-up one another, suggesting punishments. "Grounded for a week," said one. "No, 2 weeks," said another. "No, how about a month?" And no TV on top of that. Back and forth they went. Their father looked at them. "Do you know the meaning of the word grace?" he asked. It's when you get something you don't deserve," one of them replied. "Yes," said their father, "I think that is a pretty good definition. So I have decided to teach you both a lesson about grace. And for your punishment, that is what I am giving you. I am going to give you grace." End of conversation. Their father never spoke with them about it again. I've had a lot of time to think about this over the years, my friend shared with me. In a strange way, it would have been easier if our dad had simply responded immediately to his anger and doled out a punishment. Grace is not easy to give, and ironically, it's often not easy to receive. It was, according to my friend, a transformative experience in his young life. It changed who he was. It affected him so much. You know what he and his wife, many years later, decided to name one of their daughters? Grace. They named her Grace, all because his father was able to do something faithful with his anger. Now, I know maybe you're having a conversation in your head at this moment, a conversation that goes something like, but is that always possible? Turning anger into a gift of grace? Is it even always the right thing to do or the faithful thing to do? Look, I am not saying that reconciliation is possible in every single relationship. Sometimes grace just looks like two people who are no longer wounding one another, even if it means there is no longer any real relationship with the other. But a part of me also wonders if perhaps, as followers of Jesus, you and I have a very particular calling at this time, in this place, in our world today, called to be a model of how to faithfully deal with anger. Think for just a moment of how you learned to deal with anger as a young child. Did you sit down and read a textbook about anger and then take a quiz about it and get an A+ and go, okay, I've mastered getting mad? No. You probably had it modeled for you. For better or worse, somebody modeled how to handle anger, and then you made a decision along the way in your adult life whether to accept that model, fine-tune it, or reject it altogether. This, I think, was the brilliance of what Mr. Rogers used to do. Do you remember that song from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood years ago? I can see the panic on your faces. Don't worry, I am not going to sing it for you. It did begin like this. What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? And Fred Rogers was modeling for young children in that song a way of being mad that did not have to wound other people, that would not bite other people. It strikes me that there is a lot of biting going on in our society these days. I wonder if at this time in our divisive society, Jesus is asking us not to avoid anger or sweep it under the carpet, but to be careful with it, to be faithful with it. Let me get at it this way. The writer Fred Buechner recalls how he was once a speaker at a church retreat, and he read something at the retreat about his childhood. Fred Buechner had had, in many ways, a painful childhood. After hearing the piece, one of the attendees at the retreat came up to Buechner. This person had clearly read a lot of what Fred Buechner had written during the course of his career, and he said to Fred Buechner, "You have had a good deal of pain in your life, and you have been a good steward of that pain." I wonder if that's the theological framework we should use for thinking about anger. How do we become good stewards, not just of our money, not only of our time, but also of anger? In a society that loves to turn the world into either or, us and them, boxing people in or canceling them altogether, what if we, as followers of Jesus, are called to model something else? A colleague of mine reports that not too long ago, he was having a conversation with a friend. This friend, a mother, described a recent evening when she was watching television with her teenage son. She was folding the laundry, doesn't remember what they were watching. It was something stupid, and her son made some smart remark. Well, she did not like the remark, so she scolded him. Well, he did not like being scolded, so he said something even smarter. That really made her mad, so she really scolded him. And that made him really mad. So he slammed his fist on the coffee table and went upstairs to his room and slammed the door. You know what that mother started doing? She started talking to herself. She said to herself, "Well, you can just stew in your own juices up there." But then something told her that there was nothing more important at that moment than making peace with her boy. So she stopped talking to herself, and she put down her laundry, and she put down her pride, and she went upstairs and made peace. Here's what's fascinating to me. I have no idea who that mother is or who that son is, but they are a model for me. Maybe the next time you're angry or upset, you'll remember that mother. Maybe the next time you're upset, you'll remember that father of my friend who taught his son a lesson about grace, and God took that lesson about grace, that faithful first step that father made, and God did something beautiful with it. Heck, that father was just trying to be a good and faithful dad. He was concerned about toilet papering and punishment and all that. He had no idea that he was naming his granddaughter that day. What would happen if the next time you're mad and you know you're in the right? What if you put down your pride and you stopped talking to yourself and you simply took that faithful first step? Do you think God might do something beautiful with you as well? Amen.